The air in Claire Mitchell's small but tidy home was thick with the scent of roasted turkey and simmering spices, a warmth that did nothing to melt the icy disdain radiating from her family. She had spent days preparing for this Thanksgiving, scrubbing floors, polishing silverware, and cooking every dish from scratch, not because she expected gratitude, but because she had long ago accepted that this was her role. The invisible laborer. The one who made things happen without ever being seen. Her parents, Margaret and Harold Whitmore, had arrived first, their designer coats dripping with condescension as they eyed her modest living room. Margaret's lips pursed at the sight of Claire's second-hand furniture, her fingers brushing against the armrest of the couch as if testing for dust. Harold, ever the silent accomplice, merely grunted in disapproval before settling into the largest chair, his presence demanding service without a single word. Then came Richard, her older brother, with his slicked-back hair and a smirk that never quite left his face. He brought an expensive bottle of wine not to share, but to flaunt, making a show of uncorking it for himself and Diane, their younger sister, who had married into money and never let anyone forget it. Diane's husband, Paul, barely glanced at Claire as he strode in, already scrolling through his phone, his disinterest a quiet insult of its own. Claire moved through the evening like a ghost, refilling glasses, adjusting serving trays, and nodding along to conversations she wasn't invited to join. Richard held court at the table, boasting about his latest business deal, while Diane lamented the horror of her maid calling in sick last week. Margaret occasionally interjected with a passive-aggressive remark about Claire's charming little house, each word laced with the unspoken judgment that she could have done better, should have done better if only she hadn't been so foolish in her youth. Then, just as Claire returned from the kitchen with the last of the side dishes, she saw it. A neatly printed label, taped to the back of her dining chair. Family Maid. For a moment, the room blurred. The laughter around her, Richard's booming chuckle, Diane's high-pitched giggle sounded distant, warped. Claire's fingers tightened around the serving spoon in her hand, her knuckles turning white. She looked at her family, waiting for someone to say it was a joke, to peel it off with an apology, to acknowledge that this had gone too far. But no one did. Margaret sipped her wine, amused. Harold pretended not to notice. Richard smirked, leaning back in his seat as if daring her to react. Diane, ever the performer, even reached over to pat Claire's arm. "Oh, don't be so sensitive," she said, rolling her eyes. "It's just a little fun." Claire opened her mouth to say what, she wasn't sure when the front door slammed. All heads turned as Ethan, her 17-year-old son, stormed into the dining room. His dark eyes burned with a fury Claire had never seen before. He took in the scene, his mother standing frozen beside the labeled chair, the smirks on his relatives' faces, and something in him snapped. Without a word, he grabbed the label, ripped it off, and crumpled it in his fist. Then, in a voice low and trembling with rage, he said, "We're done here." And for the first time in years, Claire didn't argue. She untied her apron, set it on the table, and walked out with her son, leaving behind the half-eaten meal, the expensive wine, and the family who had never truly seen her as one of their own. The game was over. And revenge had just begun. The cold night air bit at Claire's cheeks as she followed Ethan to the car, her breath coming in short, sharp puffs of vapor. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had spent years swallowing their insults, laughing off their jabs, pretending she didn't notice the way they looked at her like she was some unfortunate charity case they tolerated out of obligation. But this had been different. This had been deliberate. A public declaration of where she stood in their eyes, not a sister, not a daughter, but hired help. Ethan didn't speak as he yanked open the car door and slid into the driver's seat, his jaw clenched so tight Claire could see the muscle twitching beneath his skin. She wanted to say something to reassure him, to downplay it, to fall back into the old habit of smoothing things over, but the words died in her throat. Instead, she just stared at her hands, still smelling of dish soap and roasted herbs, and wondered how she had let it go this far. The drive home was silent. The streets blurred past the window, streaks of neon and shadow, but Claire barely registered any of it. Her mind was a storm of humiliation, anger, and something else, something darker, sharper. Something she hadn't felt in a very long time. When they finally pulled into the driveway of their small, weathered house, Ethan killed the engine and sat there for a long moment, His fingers gripping the steering wheel like he wanted to rip it free. Then, quietly, he said, "We're not going back." Claire looked at him. Really looked at him. Her son, her brilliant, fierce son, was no longer a child. There was a hardness in his eyes now, a resolve that sent a shiver down her spine. "No," she agreed softly. "We're not." Inside, the house felt too quiet, too empty. The leftovers she had packed for her family, the summer house. The one Richard had sold without consulting her. The one he claimed had been left solely to him. Claire's hands shook. "Where did you get this?" "Grandma's lawyer retired last year. His files were transferred to Carter and Lowe for archiving. When I saw the name, I looked." Ethan hesitated, then added, "I wasn't supposed to. But after tonight." He didn't need to finish. Claire stared at the screen, the words blurring together. All these years. All the struggles, the sacrifices, the nights she lay awake wondering how she would pay the bills and they had stolen from her. Her own family. A slow, simmering rage began to build in her chest. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Ethan's eyes gleamed. "We talk to Mr. Carter." And just like that, the game changed. Because Claire Mitchell was done being the family maid. And it was time they learned exactly what she was capable of. The office of Daniel Carter, senior partner at Carter and Lowe, smelled of leather-bound law books and expensive coffee. Claire sat stiffly in the plush chair across from his mahogany desk, her fingers curled tight around the strap of her purse. She had dressed carefully for this meeting, a simple blazer, slacks, the kind of outfit that whispered professionalism rather than screamed desperation. Next to her, Ethan fidgeted with his phone, his knee bouncing in restless energy. Daniel Carter was younger than Claire had expected, mid-40s, with sharp grey eyes and the kind of controlled demeanor that suggested he was used to winning. He had greeted Ethan with a firm handshake and Claire with a polite nod before settling behind his desk and steepling his fingers. "So," he said, glancing between them. "Ethan tells me you have a situation." Claire took a slow breath. Then, methodically, she laid it all out: the will, the forgery, the way her family had systematically erased her from her grandmother's legacy. She kept her voice steady, but beneath the surface, her anger simmered, a quiet, seething thing that threatened to crack through her composure. Daniel listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against his palm. "This is serious," he said finally. "If what you're saying is true, if the will was forged, that's not just civil fraud. That's criminal." Ethan straightened. "We have proof." He pulled out a flash drive and slid it across the desk. The original will, plus emails between Richard and the executor. They knew. Daniel plugged in the drive, his eyes scanning the documents as they loaded. Claire watched his face, searching for any flicker of reaction, but his professionalism was impenetrable. After a long moment, he exhaled sharply. "Okay," he said. "Here's what we're dealing with. Proving forgery is one thing. Proving intent is another. We'll need more than this: bank records, witness statements, anything that ties your parents or siblings to the fraud." He paused, then added, "And we'll need to move fast. If they suspect you're digging, they'll cover their tracks." Claire nodded. "What do you need from me?" Daniel's gaze locked onto hers. "Access. To their homes, their devices, their financials. Anything you can get without tipping them off." A cold determination settled over Claire. She thought of Richard's smug grin, Diane's dismissive laughter, her mother's withering glances. They had underestimated her for years. That was about to change. Ethan cleared his throat. "I can help with the tech side. Richard's careless with his passwords. And Diane's husband Paul has got skeletons. I know where to look." Daniel arched a brow. "You're sure?" Ethan's smile was razor-thin. "Trust me." Claire felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Hope, yes, but something darker, sharper. Something that relished the thought of what was coming. "Good," Daniel said. He slid a business card across the desk. "I'll start building the case. You two get me everything you can. And Claire," he met her eyes, "play nice with your family. Let them think they've won. Right up until the moment they haven't." Claire took the card, her fingers steady. Oh, she could play nice. But winning. That would be hers. The invitation was perfectly crafted, a handwritten note on thick cream stationery, the ink slightly smudged at the edges to make it look hastily penned, as if Claire had second-guessed sending it at all. I overreacted at Thanksgiving, she wrote, her script deliberately uneven. Family is family. Let's try again, dinner at my place this Friday. She sealed it in an envelope and handed it to Ethan to mail, watching as her son's mouth twisted in disapproval. They don't deserve this, he muttered, but he dropped it in the mailbox anyway. Claire didn't answer. She was too busy calculating. The RSVPs trickled in over the next 2 days, first Diane, who couldn't resist the chance to gloat, then Richard, who likely saw it as an opportunity to reinforce his dominance. Her parents, predictably, waited until the last minute to respond, as if debating whether Claire was worth their time. By Thursday night, the guest list was set. All the players were coming. And Claire was ready. She spent Friday morning cooking, filling the house with the same comforting aromas that had permeated Thanksgiving: roast turkey, cinnamon-spiced sweet potatoes, buttery rolls. But this time, Margaret's fork clinked against her plate. What about her? Claire kept her eyes down. It's just, I miss her. And I can't help but wonder what she'd think of us now. Richard snorted. She'd be proud of me and Diane. You. He shrugged. Not so much. Claire's fingers tightened around the recorder in her pocket. Maybe. But she always believed in fairness. She lifted her gaze, meeting Richard's eyes. Didn't she? A flicker of unease crossed his face. Diane, oblivious, rolled her eyes. Oh, here we go. You're still hung up on the will? She laughed. God, Claire, it's been years. Let it go. Claire tilted her head. Why? Because you got what you wanted. Diane's smile faltered. Margaret set down her wineglass with a sharp thud. Claire. Enough. This is beneath you. Is it? Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. Or is it just inconvenient? Richard's chair scraped back as he stood. What the hell is this? Claire didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her apron and pulled out the recorder, placing it gently on the table. The red light glowed like a warning. For the first time that night, the room was utterly silent. Then the front door opened. Ethan stepped inside, followed by Daniel Carter, who held a manila folder thick with documents. Richard's face went pale. What? Daniel cut him off. Richard Whitmore, Diane Whitmore Langley, Margaret and Harold Whitmore. He set the folder on the table. You've been served. Claire finally let herself smile. Game on. The silence that followed Daniel Carter's declaration was so absolute Claire could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Richard stood frozen, his hand still hovering over the table as if he'd been reaching for the recorder to smash it, maybe, or snatch it away, but now his fingers twitched uselessly in the air. Diane's mouth hung open, her carefully glossed lips parted in shock. Margaret had gone bone-white, one manicured hand clutching the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Only Harold seemed unmoved, but the way his knuckles whitened around his wineglass betrayed him. Claire let the moment stretch, savoring it. Then, with deliberate calm, she untied her apron and draped it over the back of the chair, the same chair they'd labeled Family Maid. The symbolism wasn't lost on them. You. Richard's voice was a strangled rasp. You set us up. Claire didn't blink. I invited you to dinner. You brought the confession. Daniel stepped forward, flipping open the folder to reveal a stack of legal documents. Based on the evidence we've gathered, including tonight's recorded admissions, we're filing a civil suit for fraud, forgery, and unjust enrichment. Criminal charges may follow. His tone was cool, professional, but there was no mistaking the steel beneath it. The original will left Claire 30% of the estate, including the summer home. You altered it. You stole from her. Diane shot up from her seat, her chair screeching against the floor. That's a lie. Ethan, leaning against the doorway with his arms crossed, snorted. It's all on tape, Aunt Diane. You just said she should let it go about the will. Why would she need to let it go if there was nothing to hide? Margaret finally found her voice. Claire. Her tone was a weapon, sharp with decades of practiced disappointment. How could you do this to your family? Claire almost laughed. The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking gall sent a hot rush of fury through her veins. How could I? She cut herself off, pressing her palms flat against the table. When she spoke again, her voice was eerily calm. You took everything from me. Not just money. Not just the house. You took my place. You made me the joke, the servant, the one who didn't deserve what was rightfully hers. She leaned forward. And you did it with a smile. Richard recovered first, his shock hardening into anger. You won't win this, he spat. You think a cheap recorder and some lawyer fresh out of traffic court will hold up? We'll bury you. Daniel didn't flinch. Interesting strategy. Let's see how it holds up against the forged will, the bank records showing the diverted funds, and he pulled a sheet from the folder. Paul's little offshore accounts. The ones he's been using to hide money from the IRS. Paul, who had been silent until now, went rigid. What? Diane whirled on her husband. What is he talking about? Ethan grinned. Oops. Chaos erupted. Diane shrieked at Paul, who shouted back, their marriage crumbling in real time. Richard was yelling at Daniel, at Claire, at Ethan, his face purpling with rage. Margaret clutched at Harold's arm, hissing something frantic in his ear. And Claire watched. She watched as the family who had spent years looking down on her, mocking her, erasing her, finally felt the ground crack beneath their feet. Daniel raised his voice over the din. We'll be in touch with formal discovery requests. I'd advise you all to retain counsel. He glanced at Claire. Unless there's anything else. Claire studied them, her brother, red-faced and sputtering, her sister, tears smearing her mascara, her mother, her perfect composure in tatters. No, she said softly. I think we're done here. She turned and walked out of the dining room, Ethan and Daniel falling in step behind her. The cacophony of their panic followed her all the way to the front door. Daniel studied her for a long moment before nodding. Then we press forward. Full litigation. Public records. No deals. Claire smiled. The Whitmore family's downfall played out like a slow-motion car crash. Richard's business partners, smelling blood in the water, began distancing themselves, leaving his ventures floundering. Diane, now embroiled in a vicious divorce, was forced to move back in with their parents, a humiliation Claire knew her sister would never recover from. And Margaret and Harold, their carefully constructed facade of respectability crumbling, became pariahs in their own social circles, the whispers of fraud and theft too loud to ignore. Claire could have reveled in it. Part of her did. But the sweetest moment came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, when a courier delivered a single envelope to her doorstep. Inside was a letter from her parents' attorney, offering her the summer house, her summer house, and a lump sum payment, no conditions attached. A surrender. Ethan, reading over her shoulder, let out a low whistle. They're scared. Claire folded the letter neatly and slid it back into the envelope. Good. She didn't respond. Because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And for the first time in her life, Claire held all the power. The courtroom was silent as the judge's gavel came down with a final, echoing crack. Claire Mitchell, once the overlooked daughter, the family joke, the invisible maid, stood perfectly still as the words washed over her, judgment in favor of the plaintiff. It was over. She had won. The terms were absolute. The forged will was nullified. The summer house, her grandmother's beloved cottage by the lake, the place where Claire had spent the happiest summers of her childhood, was legally hers again. The stolen inheritance, every penny of it, would be returned with interest. Richard, already drowning in IRS penalties, had been ordered to pay additional damages for fraud. Diane, her divorce finalized, received nothing from the estate. Paul had seen to that, his own legal battles leaving him with nothing to share. And Margaret and Harold, their names dragged through the mud of public court records, had slunk back to their hollow mansion, their reputations in ruins. Justice, Claire thought, tasted even sweeter than revenge. The summer house smelled of pine and saltwater when Claire stepped inside for the first time in 15 years. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching motes of dust that swirled like glitter in the air. The furniture was different. Richard had sold most of the originals, but the bones of the place remained, sturdy and familiar. Ethan followed her in, running a hand along the fireplace mantel. "It's smaller than I remember," he admitted. Claire smiled. "It's perfect." That night, they built a bonfire on the beach. The flames licked at the sky, casting long shadows over the sand. Claire reached into her bag and pulled out the folded, yellowed label family Maid that had started it all. For a moment, she studied it in the firelight. Then, without ceremony, she tossed it into the blaze. It caught instantly, curling into ash. Ethan handed her a glass of wine. Daniel, who had insisted on coming as both their lawyer and their friend, raised his own in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said. Claire clinked her glass against theirs. "To justice." The fire crackled, the waves crashed, and for the first time in her life, Claire felt something settle inside her, a quiet, unshakable peace. She had been the family maid. Now, she was free. Want more revenge stories? If you loved Claire's journey from humiliation to victory, subscribe now for more gripping tales of justice, betrayal, and the sweet taste of payback. Don't miss our next story, The Silent Partner, where a betrayed wife turns the tables on her husband in the most unexpected way. Subscribe today. Your next obsession awaits.